In the long, brutal history of naval warfare, battles are remembered for the clash of giant dreadnoughts and the thunder of carrier air wings. But the single greatest anti-submarine achievement in history doesn't belong to a titan of the sea. It belongs to one tiny, unassuming American ship. This is not a legend or a sea story. It is a documented fact. In the spring of 1944, the USS England, a small destroyer escort, achieved the impossible. In just 12 days, it hunted, tracked, and personally destroyed 6 Imperial Japanese submarines, one after another. This single feat stunned the Allied High Command and sent a shockwave of disbelief through the Japanese Navy. How could one small ship, in less than 2 weeks, accomplish what entire fleets had failed to do? This is the story of the 12-day hunt that should not have been possible. By 1944, the Pacific Ocean was a sprawling graveyard. While massive carrier duels and brutal island invasions dominated the headlines, a far quieter, more sinister war was being waged beneath the waves. Imperial Japanese submarines operating in deadly wolf packs were prowling the vital shipping lanes that formed the lifeblood of the Allied advance. These steel sharks were not just hunting warships. Their primary mission was far more devastating: to strangle the war machine. Every transport ship filled with soldiers, every freighter loaded with ammunition, every tanker of precious fuel sent to the bottom was a crippling blow. This was a war of attrition, a silent slaughter, and the Allies were bleeding. Their convoys were slow, their anti-submarine tactics were often frustratingly ineffective, and the losses were mounting at an unsustainable rate. The Japanese I-boats were masters of the deep, and Allied command was becoming desperate. They needed a solution, any solution, to stop the hemorrhaging of men and material. The entire Pacific strategy depended on it. Against the terrifying, unseen threat of the Japanese wolf packs, salvation didn't arrive in the form of a steel giant. There was no thunderous battleship or massive, awe-inspiring fleet carrier to take on this subterranean menace. Our hero was a vessel that by all accounts was an underdog, the USS England, designation DE-635. The England was a destroyer escort, a class of ship that was the very definition of expendable. These were small, fast, and relatively cheap vessels, mass-produced factory ships designed for one purpose only: protecting the enormous, slow-moving merchant convoys from U-boats in the Atlantic, and now Japanese submarines in the Pacific. They were the blue-collar workhorses of the Navy, not its glamorous stars. She was less than half the size of a true fleet destroyer, often outgunned and rarely given a second thought by naval analysts. Yet, within her small, unassuming hull, resided the grit and determination of a crew ready to take on the most lethal predators the Pacific had to offer. This was a David versus Goliath scenario, and the England was about to prove that heart and smarts trumped sheer size. The crew's courage and skill were undeniable, but they needed a technological advantage to fight a war that was, fundamentally, a deadly game of blind man's bluff. And the USS England possessed exactly that, a secret weapon known as the Hedgehog mortar. Imagine the standard depth charge, a large barrel of explosives rolled off the stern, forcing the attacking ship to drive over the sub and momentarily lose sonar contact. It was wildly inaccurate, relying on massive explosions to succeed. It was like fighting a sniper duel by throwing hand grenades randomly. The Hedgehog, however, changed the game entirely. Mounted on the bow, it was a forward-throwing projector that launched a devastating spread of 24 small bombs in a circular pattern ahead of the ship. Crucially, these charges were contact-fused, meaning they only exploded upon direct impact with the submarine's hull. This feature was revolutionary. If they exploded, you knew you had a kill. If they didn't, the sonar operator could keep the sub locked on for a second pass, never losing contact. This wasn't guesswork. This was precision anti-submarine warfare. It was the lethal edge that transformed the underdog into a true predator. The tension didn't build slowly. It snapped into existence on May 19, 1944. The USS England was cruising near the Solomon Islands when the chilling, rhythmic echo of the sonar, the iconic ping, 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 indicated contact. Not just static, but a definite, moving target. The powerful Japanese submarine I-16. This was the moment of truth. For months, the theory of the hedgehog had been studied. Now it was time for its combat debut. The officers in the England's Combat Information Center, CIC, had only one chance to prove their radical forward-throwing tactic. The destroyer escort closed in, its entire crew holding their breath as they listened to the subtle shift in the sonar return, marking the sub's depth and course. The order was given. "Fire, Hedgehog!" The deck shuddered as 24 small, lethal projectiles leaped from the ship, tracing arcs into the sea. Silence hung heavy, the agonizing pause before confirmation. Then, deep beneath the waves, came the unmistakable, earth-shaking sound. A series of dull, heavy thuds, followed by a violent, muffled roar. The contact-fused charges had found their mark. Oil and debris erupted to the surface. Kill number 1 was confirmed. The impossible 12-day clock had started ticking, and the crew had tasted success, a potent, addictive reward that spurred them on to the next hunt. The blood was barely washed from the England's deck before the crew was back on the hunt. The single victory against the I-16 hadn't just secured a zone. It had given the crew a profound, deadly confidence. They now knew the hedgehog worked, and they were no longer content merely to protect. They were hungry to destroy. 3 days later, on May 22nd, the sonar operators picked up their next victim. This time, there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. The target was the RO-106. The England closed with the chilling precision of a seasoned assassin, using the very tactics they had just invented. Ping, ping, boom. The kill was swift and brutal, but the England didn't stop to celebrate. The momentum was too fierce to break. Less than 24 hours later, on May 23rd, contact was made with the RO-14. This was an unthinkable pace. The crew, already operating on the ragged edge of exhaustion, transformed the hunt into a deadly routine. They were performing a flawless operational tempo, a lethal 48-hour killing spree that was unprecedented in the history of naval warfare. They had the target's depth, they had the speed, and they knew exactly where to drop the cluster of steel and explosive death. Another shudder, another plume of debris, and the Pacific swallowed another Japanese sub. In less than a week, a single tiny destroyer escort had sunk 3 enemy submarines. The pattern was established, and the escalation was terrifying. The England was no longer a defender. She was a sub-killer, and the Japanese wolf packs suddenly had a terrifying new predator in their midst. The crew of the USS England, fueled by adrenaline and the sheer impossibility of their run, was already on the scent of their 4th victim. On May 24th, the day after sinking RO-104, they found RO-116. The Hedgehog flew, the sea erupted, and the tally climbed to 4. But as the England was busy setting an impossible record, the reports were finally filtering up the chain of command, landing directly on the desk of one of the Pacific's most formidable figures, Fleet Admiral William Bull Halsey. Halsey was accustomed to big victories, the destruction of fleets, the capture of islands. But when the message detailing the single-handed exploits of the small destroyer escort arrived, listing 4 confirmed kills in mere days, even the veteran admiral was stunned into disbelief. His legendary response, transmitted back down the chain, has become part of naval lore. It was short, pointed, and perfectly conveyed the shock of the entire admiralty. Are you sure? This wasn't just a win. It was a phenomenon so unprecedented it defied the logic of naval strategy. Halsey's skeptical question is the ultimate social proof. If the greatest military minds of the era couldn't believe it, then your own amazement is perfectly justified. The England wasn't just sinking subs, it was rewriting the rules of war, forcing the entire Allied command to pay attention to the little ship that refused to quit. The glory and the shock of Kill 4 quickly dissolved into a brutal, grinding reality. The USS England and her crew were running on fumes. They hadn't slept properly in nearly a week, subsisting on cold rations and pure adrenaline. The sheer, relentless pace of the hunt was pushing every man to his breaking point. Fatigue is the enemy of precision, and a single mistake in a submarine hunt meant death. The stakes had never been higher, yet the sea offered no respite. On May 26th, the rhythmic ping located their next quarry, RO-108. This was the hardest kill yet. Every sonar reading was agonizing. Every movement of the ship felt sluggish. The crew, muscles aching and eyes burning, had to fight not only the Japanese sub beneath them, but the creeping tide of exhaustion that threatened to dull their senses. They had to be perfect, even when they could barely stand. They fought through the haze, executed the maneuver, and unleashed the hedgehog. The dull thud confirmation was the sweetest sound imaginable. 5 down. The men were utterly spent, but they were still in the fight, proving their extraordinary endurance under impossible duress. The audience, feeling the weight of their struggle, is now entirely bound to their success. The crew was utterly shattered, but the universe had one last monumental challenge for the USS England. On May 31st, 1944, exactly 12 days after their first kill, the sonar room delivered the electrifying news. Contact. The target was RO-105. This wasn't just another patrol. This was the grand finale. Every man on the ship knew what this meant. Sinking this submarine wouldn't just be another victory. It would be a record so towering, so incredible, that it would define the ship, the crew, and potentially the entire anti-submarine war. The pressure was immense, but the exhaustion was overridden by a fierce, focused determination. The hunt for RO-105 was a masterpiece of coordination. The England closed in, quiet and deadly, their approach flawless. Every detail, the speed, the angle, the depth, had to be perfect. The order was given, and the final barrage of the hedgehog flew through the air. This time the sound was not just a thud, it was a deafening, massive roar. Deep beneath the waves, the RO-105 was ripped apart by a cataclysmic explosion. The ocean surface churned into a violent froth, quickly covered by a colossal slick of oil and debris that confirmed the kill beyond all doubt. 6 submarines. 12 days. The unimaginable promise of the video's title had been fulfilled. The entire ship erupted in a sustained, exhausted cheer. They had faced the silent terror of the wolf packs and, against all odds, executed an unparalleled feat of naval supremacy. The climactic payoff had arrived, and history was irrevocably made. As the celebratory news reached Allied command, a very different, far more terrified reaction was unfolding in Tokyo. The Japanese Imperial Navy was in utter shock. They couldn't comprehend the sudden, catastrophic vanishing act. 6 highly trained submarines, commanded by experienced officers, had simply ceased transmitting, all within a small 12-day window, and all in the same operational area. For the Japanese, it wasn't just a tactical loss, it was a profound intelligence failure. They couldn't decipher what weapon, what new Allied tactic, or what powerful fleet was systematically eliminating their prized submarine force. The impact was immediate and strategic. The Japanese command was forced to conclude that this area was simply too hot, too dangerous, and had been somehow compromised. they immediately pulled their remaining wolf packs and rerouted their entire submarine fleet away from the highly effective scouting and attack positions near the Solomon Islands. The England hadn't just sunk 6 vessels. It had single-handedly broken the back of a major Japanese offensive. This tiny destroyer escort had won a crucial strategic victory, fundamentally altering the Japanese deployment and giving the Allies desperately needed breathing room. This was the true staggering consequence of the 12-day run. The USS England sailed back into port not as a routine destroyer escort, but as a legend. Her crew, the exhausted heroes of the 12-day run, received one of the Navy's highest honors, the Presidential Unit Citation for their extraordinary heroism in action. It was a recognition reserved for performance so outstanding it transcended the call of duty. But perhaps the most lasting tribute came from Admiral Bull Halsey himself, the same man who had messaged, "Are you sure?" now offered a powerful declaration, cementing the ship's place in history. He famously proclaimed, "There'll always be an England in the United States Navy." This final recognition was the emotional payoff the crew and the audience needed. Their grueling, relentless work had earned them immortality. The little ship that was built to be expendable had become synonymous with courage and unparalleled success, securing its legacy as the ultimate sub-killer. The England's moment of glory was immortal, but the war machine was relentless. A story of pure, unbroken triumph often rings hollow, and the submarine killer still had to pay its price. Less than a year after their legendary run, in May 1945, the little ship's luck finally ran out near Okinawa. While escorting a convoy, the USS England was struck by a Japanese kamikaze aircraft. The impact was devastating. Though the crew fought with the same tenacity they showed against the submarines, the ship suffered massive damage, and several brave men were tragically killed or wounded. The England survived the attack, but the damage was too severe to justify repairs. Her fighting days were over. She was decommissioned, her career cut short not by a sub, but by a desperate aerial attack. This poignant, almost tragic end honors the sacrifice of those who served, and reminds us that their unbelievable 12-day run was achieved in a world where peril was constant, making that victory all the more rare and precious. The USS England's feat remains utterly unique, a record that, with complete authority, we can confirm will never be broken. Modern submarine warfare is fundamentally different. Nuclear-powered subs operate at speeds and depths unimaginable in 1944, and the large exposed wolf packs are a tactical dinosaur of the past. Today's stealth technology and long-range weaponry eliminate the need for surface ships to close to point-blank range for a kill. The England's incredible 12-day run was a perfect, unrepeatable confluence of 3 factors: the crew's relentless skill, the advent of the revolutionary Hedgehog technology, and the Japanese tactical error of deploying their submarines in a predictable formation. The story of the little destroyer escort that took on the entire Japanese submarine force is more than just history. It is a testament to the fact that in the right hands, with the right technology, even the most insurmountable challenge can be conquered. The USS England didn't just win a battle. It carved out a singular, immortal place in naval history.